Stefan. We're doing this right off the back of the Leverkusen-Stuttgart game. Don't worry, we're going to get to the other games too. We're just going to do this a little bit different by going after every one of the major games. I wish I could tell you that there's lots of goals to talk about, but it isn't. It was a very tightly fought 0-0 draw. My main takeaway right after this game is that Alexander Nübel must have read my Manuel Neuer article and thought this was the time to shine.
He must have done, yeah. He was outstanding. Annoyingly outstanding. It was one of those performances that happen in Football Manager when your team have a number of chances and the opposing goalkeeper is playing a 10 out of 10. And you're like, that never happens in real life. Well, it happened more or less in this game. That's maybe a slight exaggeration because I'm not sure Leverkusen created a million chances, but they had a handful of chances which Alexander Nübel dealt with really, really well. And yeah, Stuttgart as a whole, I would say, actually performed pretty well defensively. They went into this game very defensive, with very little real interest in trying to score goals until maybe the last kind of 10 or 15 minutes of the game. It was very similar to how they set up against Bayern, even though Bayern eventually kind of broke through. Yeah, they were rewarded with a point. You could maybe argue that obviously they were, kind of pushed sideways or kind of knocked off their stride, obviously, with Jamie Leveling getting an injury just a couple of minutes into the game. Looks like he pulled his hamstrings. So he's such an important outball for Stuttgart, so you can understand why that kind of maybe threw their game plan out the window. But it was a match in which Dennis Undav might as well have been sitting on the sideline with his feet up or something, because he did absolutely nothing in this game too. He did absolutely nothing up front either. I was actually quite disappointed in both of them, to be perfectly honest with you. But defensively, I thought Stuttgart did pretty well. I thought Mittelstadt did well. I thought the two central midfielders, Carazor and Stiller, were outstanding in this game. And the two central defenders may be a little tricky, a little nervous at times. Obviously, Chase got caught twice in possession and very nearly kind of awarded Leverkusen goals. But as you said, Alexander Nübel, whenever Leverkusen did break through, Nübel was there, and he's basically earned his team a point tonight.
Yeah, I think it was towards 72nd minute or so was it Frimpong that went 1-on-1 with him. And he does the spread, and I thought that was a phenomenal stop. Just looking at the stats, the XG, and this is from the Bundesliga.com app, 2.81 in Leverkusen's favor versus 0.35 for Stuttgart. I think that tells you quite a bit about this game, doesn't it? And shots towards goal 13-4, on target 5-1. I mean, that's maybe the other thing. The shot volume on target wasn't necessarily high enough for Leverkusen to maybe get a little bit more out of this, right? I mean, testing the goalkeeper 5 times, sure, but maybe there just wasn't enough there. And I think too, the leveling thing, once that happens, Fabian Rieder comes on, right? Actually comes off again in the second half for Chris Führich, which makes me think that was maybe the tactical substitution that they hope to do in the second half, to maybe get a little bit more possession in the final third, because Führich is a little bit better to hold the ball, right? Whereas Leveling is the more counter-attacking player. I thought, okay, what Rieder isn't necessarily... I understand what Hoeneß was trying to do here, right? Rieder comes on, he's a bit more dynamic, he's a little bit more forward playing, he's not a one-to-one replacement for Leveling. He doesn't have quite that out winger type play, right? So, and I think maybe tactically that did hurt them a little bit, because then all of a sudden you no longer are playing like this counter-attacking team with pace on the wing. You have a player who's maybe drifts a little bit more into the middle, right? And Fabian Rieder. And then, of course, when it was still a draw, I can see sort of Hoeneß saying, well, now I need a winger here who can also hold the ball in Chris Führich, right? So I feel like the Chris Führich substitution would have come in the second half, even if Leveling still had been on at that stage. But you can kind of see tactically what he was trying to do here, right? It was about maintaining control as much as possible. And I think that is really the one thing that you can say about the Stuttgart side, is that they almost did to Bayer Leverkusen what Bayer Leverkusen did to Bayern Munich in a sense here, right? They said, well, we're going to try to maintain control. We're trying we know you're going to get chances, and we're just going to hope that our superior goalkeeper, because I think of the two, Nübel is the better one, is going to carry the day, and that our defense, even though it's struggling, and I mean, you're right, Chase. I feel like Chase, you can see every single time he plays this year, you can see the talent that he has, obviously, but he's also a guy who's also learning on the job. And I think, today was one of those days where he was learning on the job, and he's kind of this apprentice who just runs around, and every time he gets into a room, he gets sent to another room, and he's just chasing, and he kind of felt like the guy who was barely holding on his first day on the job, but somehow getting out on the other end intact.
Yeah, it was a bit disheveled at times. But yeah, I mean, I think tactically, I would actually say Stuttgart, yeah, like you said, more or less did a perfect job on Leverkusen here. Watching this game made me realise what they tried to do against Bayern Munich a couple of weeks ago, which obviously just didn't quite work out because, as you said, Fulrich comes on and then Demirovic comes on, and all of a sudden the game is completely opened up, and Stuttgart actually had a handful of chances, and they could have maybe actually nicked all 3 points in the kind of last 10 minutes of the game. Undav had a really great chance where he kind of gets on the end of a shot, he kind of tries to lob it into the back of the net, and it just kind of goes slightly wide of the back post. And it would have been a real smash and grab job if they had won it, and I'm sure Xabi Alonso would have been ripping his hair out full time. But tactically speaking, Stuttgart more or less did exactly what they wanted to do. They played very defensively. They really disrupted Leverkusen tremendously well. And they, in the last kind of 10-15 minutes, they had their chances to maybe even go on and win the game. So it wasn't a bad performance from Stuttgart. It was quite a frustrating one from a neutral because I was kind of hoping for a kind of box-to-box game in which, Stuttgart and Leverkusen kind of go out in a blaze of glory and it's a kind of 4-3 win for one of them. But that's my prerogative. I want to see entertainment. It's not up to Sebastian Hoeneß to entertain me. He's there to win games and pick up points. And I think after the kind of start to the season we've seen from Stuttgart, where we've seen them have these very kind of heroic failures a number of times, that maybe Hoeneß has kind of said, well, look, maybe we should just actually try and defending. Maybe we should actually try and kind of just holding out and keeping a clean sheet and taking it from there. And I think that's exactly what they did. On the flip side, I think there's also the problem that Leverkusen... I was actually quite disappointed in Leverkusen throughout the entire match, if I'm being perfectly honest with you. I don't want to take anything away from what I thought was a pretty solid Stuttgart defensive performance, even if it was maybe over-relying on great goalkeeping. But like I kind of said on social media, Xabi Alonso can maybe complain about Victor Boniface not finishing his chances, or, a Frimpong or Grimaldo passing maybe not being as specific or accurate as they usually are. But at the end of the day, he set his team up with 4 central defenders and 2 wing-backs and 2 defensive midfielders. So if you kind of add all that up together, the only attacking players in this team are actually Florian Wirtz and Victor Boniface. And in much of the game, it was a case of those two and either Grimaldo or Frimpong or maybe Xhaka having to break down a back 4, a back 5 against Stuttgart. Time after time after time, they basically were having to pull out miracles just to get through those defenders. And I don't know, I thought Alonso completely overthought his tactics here. I can understand the idea of playing, they were basically set up like a 4-4-2 or a 4-4-1-1 with Frimpong and Grimaldo as the 2 wingers, and it just didn't really work out well at all. And there's actually one moment, I think, in the 70th minute where Grimaldo and Hincapié, who was more or less playing as a left back, are basically arguing with each other because Grimaldo was trying to move inside. Hincapié kept drifting out left, and Hincapié was shouting to Grimaldo, like, hey, you're supposed to be overlapping here. He's like, no, you overlap. And you could tell that these guys didn't even know what they were doing or where they're supposed to be, because Hincapié's a central defender and he's got Grimaldo, the wing back, inside him. So Mukiele as well on the right-hand side was pretty frustrating. He kind of stormed off the pitch when he got substituted off because he didn't really offer anything in an attacking sense. And considering that, Alonso had Arthur, he had Hoffman, he had Palacios, he had Patrick Schick, he had Nathan Tella, he had all these attacking guys on the pitch, and he eventually threw some of them on. But the fact that he spent most of this game playing with 6 defenders and 2 defensive midfielders, I don't really know if he can have too many complaints about dropping points in this game.
Yeah, I feel like Mukiele at time looked like he won a raffle playing for this Leverkusen side. There's, I think, a good reason why Leipzig moved him on to PSG, and then PSG moved him on to Leverkusen. Interesting enough, here's what Granit Xhaka had to say post-game. We are disappointed. Today was probably our best performance of the season. With the ball, without the ball, we were there. We created a lot of chances and the lads worked hard. In the end, we were gutted. I mean, you gotta score goals, right? Granit, that's how it comes down to. I can see why they are frustrated. Then this is not just this game. It was the same with the Bremen game. Last year, you had the sense that when they needed a goal, they would just get one, right? And I think that is definitely the thing that is missing this season. Even that one-on-one situation against Nübel, I saw that and I was like, that's in. That's going to be in, because last year that would have been in, and this year they're just not. And sometimes it's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. And I think there's many situations this year where this Leverkusen side is maybe not quite as clinical as what they were last year, and I think that makes a bit of a difference. And at the end of the day, they will have to start being a bit more clinical if they want to replicate last year's success. Because if there's one thing that's different, Bayern Munich do put their chances away right now.
Yeah, and there was that really obvious one-on-one chance with Victor Boniface up against Nübel, where he kind of turned, I think it was Wagnerman maybe, or maybe it was Chase himself, and there was basically ran him one-on-one. And you said Nübel gets down to his left, saves it, and you're kind of thinking that's the chance, that's the match-winning goal. Frimpong had a great chance at the back post where Florian Wirtz kind of curled across the back post, and Frimpong was basically there to tap it home, and he missed it. And, I can understand the frustration with that, and I know he does score goals, but if it's an actual winger in that position or an actual forward in that position, maybe they know how to head it into the back of the net, but Leverkusen are relying on two wing-backs here to make up for the lack of any kind of forward players. But on the Boniface thing, because, we had this discussion in the subscriber chat with some people, and some people were saying, well, look, Boniface could have scored 2 goals today, and job done, and Leverkusen go home happy for a very good performance. But that statement, if Victor Boniface was consistent in front of goal, I think is a huge if, because he's just not that player. He's very powerful, he's very strong, he's a real handful. Sometimes he scores outstanding goals, and he's a great, great player. But if there's one thing I think we can confidently hold against Boniface, is he's not a consistently clinical striker. He's just not one of he's like, there's lots of things you can throw at Harry Kane. He's not quick, he's not physical, blah 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 blah. But the one thing you cannot hold against Harry Kane is that he always finishes every single chance, much like Robert Lewandowski. And I just don't see Boniface as that kind of player. Maybe he'll grow into. He's still very young, of course, but he's just always been this player that's needed 5 or 6 chances to score 1 or 2 goals. And in a game like this, where there were so few chances, one of them fell to him and he didn't take it. And that's the kind of fine margins between Leverkusen maybe finishing with 3 points here and going home happy with a very happy performance, and them having to settle for 1 point. But the Granit Xhaka comments are interesting, because on the one hand, it was a pretty solid performance from Leverkusen. They did exert their dominance on Stuttgart, but as we talked about, much of that could have been down to Stuttgart's own making, where they said, we're going to sit back, we're going to play defensively, and we're not going to attack Leverkusen. So
I think so.
Yeah, I'm sure, when the analytics team at the Bayer Arena go over this game on Monday morning, they'll say, hey, great, we've got, Stuttgart only created 0.28 XG, and we've been conceding 1.6 goals a game, and we didn't concede any goals. So, that's a good sign. But I think if you actually watch the game in the context of the game, you have to bear in mind that Stuttgart did very little attacking. They had no real interest in attacking. So, I don't know. I just walked away from this game being very disappointed in Leverkusen for a number of reasons. And it's 2 points dropped, and it now means that if Bayern Munich win tomorrow, which people who listen to this podcast will already know if they have or haven't, which I assume they will, they're now, 7 points clear of Leverkusen?
Well, I think Bayern's enemy is Leipzig this year, so I think we have to pay attention to what they do, because sneakily I think they're going to be really difficult for them. But look, yeah, I mean, this is an issue that Leverkusen are going to face. Sooner or later, they have to start winning games, and maybe also, I think too. And I have had this opinion now for a little while. I think tactically, I think Sebastian Hoeneß might be the best coach in German football at the moment. And I think if to get back to what you said there about Granit Xhaka's comments, I think you're 100% right. Leverkusen was allowed to do what they were allowed to do because Stuttgart let them. And the thing is too, at 0-0, it didn't happen in the end, but I think Dennis Undav is probably more clinical than any of the players that Leverkusen have at the moment in attack, right? And so, maybe Dennis Undav just gets that one chance and it's 1-0, and Stuttgart get all 3 points. And I think that is very much by design. Also, you have to remember this, Stuttgart's goal this year is to finish top 9. So if they go to the Bayer Arena and walk away with a point, that is a big win for them. And so I think Hoeneß is going to go into the dressing room and say, oh man, if Undav had just scored that one, but he's also going to say, that's a big point for us. That sets up for us really nicely. And once again, we managed for a big portion of the game to go with a team that is from a talent level much better than us. And we got the most out of the group, even though the group is in a little bit of a transition phase. Like I think back, this was a lot like the Juventus game at times, right? Only that against Juventus, they obviously won, right? But I think this is a Stuttgart side that is slowly but surely showing that they can once again go with the big boys, and they can go toe to toe. And yeah, the defense is still learning on the job, but how much longer is that going to take? A few more match days. And so, I look at the Stuttgart side, and I'm with you. I think Granit Xhaka feels like they had control because they were allowed to have control, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, Stuttgart know how to frustrate teams when they play good teams. They frustrated Real Madrid, they frustrated Juventus, they frustrated Leverkusen now. And when they have to beat the Diddy teams like Dortmund, they can quite happily win, 5-1 or 5-0 or whatever. So they know how to pick up the points they need to pick up, and they know how to scrap for a draw. And that's exactly what they did tonight, I suppose.
And Bayern fans shouldn't be quite too happy yet, because they did beat Stuttgart at home last year too, only to get absolutely smashed in Stuttgart. So they still have to go there too. So, this isn't the end of the story yet. We'll find out what the end of the story on this match day is later in this pod.